Okay, we're here with Rent Control Board Commissioner Kurt Gonska. Kurt, thanks for stopping by. You want to tell us a little bit about why you're running for re-election?
Yeah, absolutely. And apologies, I'm getting over a bit of a cold here, so my throat's a little scratchy, but I will do my best to talk with you all today. Yeah, I mean, I am running for re-election to the rent control board. Honestly, for a lot of the same reasons that I got involved with rent control in the first place. And I think I mentioned in the questionnaire, and some of you are already familiar, but my exposure to the rent control board started in a very organic way. I live in a rent controlled apartment in Santa Monica, and years ago I had an issue with my landlord, and uh, didn't know where to turn and came across the SMR hotline and called there, and that was my first real introduction to rent control, that it even existed and what it was. And so working with the rent control staff and ultimately with the rent control board, I saw the ability, the power, the unique uh, resources that we have here for tenants in Santa Monica to help them with issues in their living conditions. And so through that process, I really saw what this system we have here can do to help people. And my whole life, whether it's been just personal interest, professional, has always been about how can we help people who need help in all kinds of various ways, just navigating systems, financial assistance, political help. And so this felt like a way that I could have a very tangible impact on a very local community, a community where I live, the community I love. I moved here from Chicago in 2014. And when I first got here, I landed in Santa Monica, and I've been here the entire time. I haven't left. And it's because of how much I love this community. And so if I could find a way to have a direct positive impact on my local neighbors, that to me is a home run. And, like I mentioned earlier in my response, we have such an amazing rent control law here. And so, going back to its origins in the 70s and through to today, I really see it as an opportunity to carry that legacy forward. And that doesn't mean that we just protect every single little bit of it at all costs. There are definitely things that we've improved over time and that we continue to find ways to improve. A lot of times it's in relation to changing conditions, whether that's economic market conditions, state laws, other elements, that we can find ways within our regulations and sometimes within charter amendments to improve upon, to modernize, and to make better our rent control law. So I'm here to protect the underlying principles behind rent control, and I'm here to look for ways to make it even better.
Thanks, Kurt. So I wanted to ask you actually just kind of your thoughts about state laws and how it impacts our rent control charter. We've seen laws like SB 79 that have had a lot of community pushback and a lot of concerns about tenant protections. What is your overall thought on how our rent control charter kind of interacts with those laws? What do you want to do to advocate to make sure that, our legislators are passing the best housing laws that helps to protect our rent control, but also obviously to produce more housing to serve the housing crisis as well?
Yeah, there's a lot there, and it's a really important question because that is sort of the defining topic or sort of debate when it comes to housing right now in Los Angeles. I think there are a number of things. One you mentioned, I think, regarding legislation, SB 79 is the huge one, right? Um, and in a lot of taking a step back here, in a lot of ways, some of these things that are happening at the state level, or even frankly with city council here in Santa Monica, are outside the direct control of the rent control board. However, that doesn't mean that we don't have a strong voice as advocates and as policy experts in this area to take a stand and to lobby for changes or for a position for or against legislation. And so when it comes to SB 79, that's actually something that I took a leadership role on with introducing a resolution with the rent control board. There were a lot of concerns leading up to that point about SB 79, especially in its original format. And frankly, to be fair, that bill became a lot better over time. But even still, I guess it was the end of the summer, maybe early fall, when the Rent Control Board took up a resolution that I introduced to we ultimately ended up voting to oppose SB 79, even with the amendments that had made the bill better because it wasn't good enough. And that's something where we can directly take a stance on as a board. And coming from Santa Monica, a place where around the state and frankly around the country, we are known for our strong tenant protections, our strong rent control law. I think it has an outsized voice, different than a lot of other, local government boards might when they send an opinion to Sacramento. Specifically, I mean, I'm happy to get into as many details as you want about these bills, but just to touch on a little bit more detail on SB 79, one of the core reasons that I opposed it was because going back to rent control's origins in Santa Monica, it was really a lot about making sure that existing tenants were not displaced, especially in regards to, existing housing stock being replaced by high-end condos or just more expensive housing units that existing tenants wouldn't be able to afford. And so when you think about that the underpinnings of that original intent of rent control and original goal of rent control, SB 79, there's a direct line to it because there are, especially in its earlier formats, but even still in its final format, it can cause significant displacement. For example, in Santa Monica, there are transit zones where we know for a fact that there are dozens and dozens of rent controlled apartments that are not exempt from SB 79, namely buildings with two rent controlled units. Three or more are exempt, but two units are not. And so there's a potential for hundreds and hundreds, if not more, tenants to be displaced under that bill. And so when it comes to legislation, whether it's SB 79 or other legislation that is going to potentially have a negative impact on our community and how it impacts existing tenants, we have a duty to analyze it, to advocate for making those state laws or even local city council ordinances better and make sure that people are considering the impact that it has on existing tenants, our existing community. So, yeah, I mean, I think either taking specific stances on legislation is one thing we can do. Talking to our city council members, talking to our state assembly members or senators are ways that we can have a real impact to help shape legislation. And also not just with the government bodies and the elected officials, but also with the community to put a spotlight on those pieces of legislation with regular people so that they're contacting their elected officials, they're taking a stand on social media and other places where they have a voice to help shape the conversation and to ultimately help to make things better, or in the cases where legislation is not good, to hopefully defeat it.
Great. Thanks for your insight on that. Let's go to Sean.
Uh, Thanks, Kurt, for coming in for your service on the Rent Control Board. You talked a little bit about leadership in the state and the state laws, and obviously, I think Santa Monica is kind of a path breaker. There's really no other kind of cities in the LA County area that have a rent control board. We are a leader on rent control. We have a lot of policies that have been put in place to protect renters and affordability. To what extent do you think that the model that we have in Santa Monica with the existing structure could be spread to other cities regionally? Are there, is there leadership that can be shown, and is there kind of an effort to get others on board with what we have modeled in our city so that not other renters have those benefits, but also so that kind of people are seeing us not as an aberration, but as a model that should be followed to kind of further secure what we have put in place here.
Yeah, I'm really happy you asked about that because that is something that we can do and should do and do when it comes in various ways. So our office gets contacted frequently by other municipalities. So our executive director, our senior staff will often provide advice or just information about what our system is here to other jurisdictions who are either trying to establish political support for a rent control system or are trying to shape a new system. In places like Pasadena, for example, I was just having a conversation with somebody yesterday about this, and admittedly, I don't know all of their local details about their system, but from my understanding, and I know this is true in other places, if not Pasadena, but I think there too, they have systems where uh, they require landlords, a certain number of landlords, a certain number of tenants to be on their rent control boards. That's very different than here in Santa Monica, where landlords can certainly get elected if they're residents of Santa Monica to the rent control board, but it's not required that a certain mix of people or tenants, landlords are there. It's really up to the voters to decide. So there are all kinds of things that we can provide advice and counsel to other places as a model. And also, one way that we can do it as commissioners is every year we go to the California Housing uh, Conference, and it's a statewide conference. I wasn't able to attend this year, but I've gone in the past, and other commissioners and our executive director went this year, I believe. And so that's an opportunity for people from all over the state. Again, places where they have rent control, places where they don't have it, and they're just starting a kernel of an idea to grow support for it. Other places where they've already passed it, but they're developing it. And that's a place where we get new information that we can implement here, but we also are sort of, the people in the room who have the longest experience with it as a municipality. So it's an opportunity for us to share our experience, our knowledge with those other jurisdictions. So I absolutely think that people can look to Santa Monica and take what we've learned over the years about how it can best help tenants and be fair to landlords, but also how it can best fit in with new state law that didn't exist at the time that ours was passed because we've had to adapt to it over time as different state laws have gone into effect. So yeah, there's a long history here, both with the law itself, but also with the people who are here. Many of you who are on this call, and many others who have been through decades of the implementation, the changes, and seeing how market conditions impact housing stock and housing prices. So there's a wealth of knowledge, and anybody who's interested, again, no matter what point in the process they are of developing rent control, should absolutely reach out to us. And we should be constantly looking for opportunities to be proactive and communicate with those jurisdictions to help because there are tenants obviously all over the region and all over the country who are amazed by the protections that we have here because they get treated unfairly and they don't have anywhere to turn.
Okay, let's go to Isabel.
Hey, Kurt. So in terms of the rent control we have in Santa Monica and your efforts to perhaps improve, you were instrumental in proposing for amendments to the rent control charter, which we may be seeing on the ballot, but not all, I think just three. But first of all, can you tell us what those are, the amendments, where we are in the process, and why you think they were necessary?
Yeah, so I was one of two commissioners, along with Commissioner Ambrose, who were on a subcommittee to evaluate and consider different charter amendments, and then ultimately to bring some that we to the full board that we thought were worth further conversation and potential inclusion on the ballot. So to quickly run through what those are in the current status of those. So
Hmm.
our last meeting, we sent three of the four sort of categories to the city council because the way it works here is that the way to get charter amendments on the ballot is either through citizen petition or the city council doing it. So the rent control board actually doesn't have our own authority to put things directly on the ballot. But so what we did with last meeting is we moved three of the four to the city council to recommend to them to do that. And then the fourth piece, we'll be taking up in a special meeting next week, this upcoming week.
Mm.
So the three that we already moved to the city council were one was changing our rent control board commissioner term limits. Currently, they're at 2 terms maximum. We would propose increasing it to 3, and that's mainly to align with the city council, which has a 3-term limit. The other charter amendment that we moved already was about um, basically our petition timelines, the decision timelines. It's a technical fix, but it's something that keeps coming up with hearings that take a long time to get decided for various reasons. So it's a tweak in the language that it basically doesn't change policy. It only clarifies the policy because the hearing officers and the staff do have some leeway in terms of there's a sort of a guideline for 120 days, but it often goes beyond that. And so this language would tweak that to
Mm,
specify directly that they have the ability to go longer than that for good cause.
mm,
And then the third provision or charter amendment would be around the registration fee. And so currently in the charter, the registration fee is not automatically the board votes to set what the registration fee is in any particular year, but there is in the charter a maximum amount that it can go up to. And there isn't any mechanism for that to change over time, that
mhm.
ceiling, except for voters to increase that cap. And this is actually something that we discovered is relatively new. I think if my memory is correct, 2014 that was inserted into the charter. Um, and so it just causes problems because we actually do a really good job of staying below that cap. Like currently, the registration fee is below what the maximum we're allowed to charge is. And we do that through very um, good budgeting, basically, and basically keeping our expenses under control. But just over time with the cost of just with inflation, with the cost of benefits and salaries and all kinds of office operations, that the need for that to increase occurs. And so this charter amendment would do is doesn't actually change the registration fee. It just changes the mechanism for determining that cap, and it would basically tie it to a specific formula that is tied to CPI, to inflation, so that there's an automatic mechanism that will increase with inflation over time. And again, the board doesn't require to actually raise the fee to that cap. It just allows for that ability to do so.
And what
And
is
then,
the fourth one that you want to move forward next week?
yeah, the fourth one is really the biggest one I think of all. There's a lot of new tenant protections that are part of this, and the core one is allowing for existing tenants to bring family members to live in their unit. And so there's a whole long list of different types of family members. So grandparents, aunts and uncles, siblings, etc. And so basically now that landlords have a lot of leases will specify the number of people who are allowed to live in the unit. And so what this would do is allow tenants to go beyond that number if that exists in the lease, if they meet certain criteria. And so obviously they would still need to adhere to building safety limits. So you couldn't just fill, a 1 bedroom with 10 people or something like that, but you would be allowed to bring in other family members. And I know various commissioners have different sort of objectives here, but or not even really objectives isn't the right word, but just different reasons for it. And I think the core reason, in my opinion, is to a couple of things. One, we know of very specific situations where there's tragedy in a family or circumstances change, and an adult might need to take in a minor, a family member, to live with them, whether that is a niece or a nephew or a cousin or some other relation. But currently, a landlord in many cases could deny that and putting that family member in peril. Other circumstances where an elderly family member needs medical care or, and they can't afford live-in medical care, so they need to rely on a family member. Um, Other circumstances where a family member might be at risk of becoming homeless and a family member wants to bring them in to live with them. So there are all kinds, those are just a few examples, but there are all kinds of reasons why we feel that tenants should be allowed to bring in additional family members into their units. And so there are other provisions here that are additional tenant protections within this charter amendment. And one of the things we're working through, part of the reason that it's taking longer than the other three is because we are also working with the city attorney's office and the city council to align what they are thinking of doing for tenants across the city in non-controlled units. We want to basically make sure that whatever provisions we end up passing are consistent across all tenants in Santa Monica.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're a bit over time, but I'll defer to my colleagues if your question is worth asking. We'll keep going. So Lynn, go ahead.
This could be a simple one. You stated that senior women are experiencing homelessness at higher rates than any other group in the region. I found that quite curious. Do you know what factors are driving this trend?
I don't know specific to that demographic, but I do know that, there's this perception out there that, homeless people are all drug addicts or addicted to alcohol or have mental illnesses, and so they wind up on the streets because of that. And that certainly happens in some cases, but I think in the vast majority of cases, it's it's the addiction isn't what leads to homelessness. It's the homelessness that leads to the addiction. And so I think pointing to senior women, senior citizen women is a good a good case in point there because I don't know about you, but I don't know a lot of senior citizen women who are addicted to meth and then become homeless, right? And so it just kind of cuts at that narrative of what people have, and the reason that that's important is because when people have these misperceptions, these narrative fallacies, it impacts the way that they support or oppose different policy solutions to those problems. And so I think that we need to make sure that I think typically when it comes to another big driver of homelessness is that it's people who are just barely scraping by to be able to afford their rent. And something happens, they get fewer shifts at work, they lose their job, a spouse gets deported, where then all of a sudden that rent that they were barely scraping by to pay, they can no longer afford. And then they fall out of that housing market and they become homeless. And so I think that happens a lot with senior citizen women. And so part of the reason pointing that out is, like I said, just to really cut at that narrative that's out there that these people kind of, are in this homeless situation because of something that is their own fault, which
Right.
in many, many cases is not true at all.
Great point. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Kurt. That's all the time we have. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, everybody.
All right.
Have a
Have a
good
nice
one.
day.